Of course, we can't do that a great deal here. I put a quote from one of my study group colleagues on the frontis piece here, because there are certain characteristics of the nuclear enterprise as a whole which affect nuclear power and the discourse surrounding it. Nuclear technologies are different than other technologies in certain key ways. And sometimes, as one Japanese local government official said, these aren't electric power plants, these are nuclear political power plants. He was talking about the difficulty they have in gaining a measure of political and democratic control, and fighting the secrecy, the opacity, the industrial propaganda machine, the tightness of relationship between industry and government. And this is true for nuclear industries worldwide. And it impedes a rational democratic conversation about nuclear power. So it's easy for us to see an authoritarian country like China saying, you will build a bunch of nuclear power plants. Well, we know how Chinese workers are treated. We know the amount of democracy there is in China. We know the pollution. We know the leading cause of death in China. It's a different world, and we have to be careful that we don't narrow our focus so that we miss the larger picture of what we want out of an energy system, of an electric generation system. Most of the issues, good and bad, about nuclear power come from its extreme energy density. As Paul said a million times, maybe it's more than a million times more energy dense than chemical reactions. That's the physical virtue of nuclear fission as an energy source. And that's very attractive to a physicist. It can be very daunting to an engineer or to a planner, because that introduces a physical regime which is very far from the regime which supports life on the planet. It has to be isolated, it has to be taken care of in entirely different ways than a chemical reaction. We agree about a lot of things, Paul and I, and I appreciate all the bad things he said about coal burning, because I also think those things, and so we can save all that time. Coal burning is destroying the planet, and because of the coal reservoir, the reserves of coal on the planet, halting the burning of coal is one of our primary things that our civilization has to do. I'm not going to be able to cover everything. We have prepared a lot of copies, not very many in relation to the number of people here. There's really only a dozen of each on the table back there. So I'll refer to some key references, and there is a bibliography there also. We will post this talk, such as it is, with the bibliography on our website at www.lasg this evening when we get back home, so you can get what you don't get today and tear it apart. The other frontispiece quote, which someone brought up last night in the public discussion, is characterizing nuclear power overall. Nuclear power is electrons on welfare. And I'm talking to Paul today, I think that I think it's important to acknowledge the extreme care and expertise that has gone into maintaining our nuclear infrastructure in the U.S. I've been working with the DOE for a long time. There's a lot of very careful, very smart people around, and if it weren't for them, we'd be in a lot of trouble. The problem is in part that these institutions, like Los Alamos Lab and the Department of Energy, tend to develop intellectual echo chambers where certain received truths become almost part of the woodwork. So, for example, I don't know whether anybody at the DOE really understands the degree to which our society subsidizes nuclear subsidy, which comes in dozens of forms and is detailed in a report from, I believe, February of this year by Doug Kotlow for the Union of Concerned Scientists, amounts to on the order overall of about 7 cents per kilowatt. In other words, the total subsidy provided to nuclear power in this country is approximately equal to the value of the electricity produced. It has never been able to wean itself from these public subsidies, which come, there's subsidies for electricity produced, subsidies for capital, discount rates, loan guarantees, which are not exactly a subsidy. It depends on how much risk you think there is. There's a debate about that. Nuclear power is not an industry that has ever been able to stand on its own. That's why the epigram, electrons on welfare, is appropriate. And this is not visible. It's not like people in the Department of Energy are all thinking, how shall we deceive the public? It's more that this is just part of the work. Okay, I have to go really fast, and I apologize for certain raw aspects of this presentation, because it will be raw. We are really busy. I'm sorry. And we all have only a limited amount of time. I am hoping that, like Sid said earlier, we will continue to learn and that we will apply what we learn and be engaged citizens. And we're not just here to entertain Paula and I. And this is a problem we have in citizen groups. You know, go to a lot of work to organize a meeting. The default mode is one of entertainment in our culture. And we hope we can get beyond that. Another problem we have is it takes a lot of time to fight through misinformation and lack of information. We're all overloaded. We don't like to fight authority. Paul is constrained in what he can say on the record. Fortunately, I'm not. But we have to be aware that it'll take a lot of time. We have authority figures like Senator Bingaman, for example. It's important to know that Senator Bingaman, of his five largest lifetime campaign contributors, 3 are nuclear power or nuclear weapons contractors. This is an important part of the nuclear power story. It is very difficult to have a conflict of interest-free discussion about nuclear power. It's also true that some things that are stated by anti-nuclear organizations like ours have been exaggerated. We hope we don't exaggerate. We try very hard not to do it, but sometimes it does happen in our culture, which is one of carelessness about a lot of things, and people are busy. Paul didn't do too much of this straw man kind of stuff, which is annoying, but Paul didn't do it. The hardest part is seeing the context that we are in. You know, we're all, focusing on the things that are around us, and actually Sid said it earlier, we're in a period of tremendous historical and cultural change right now. The assumptions that we have brought to these problems that we have formed over our whole lifetimes may or may not, in many cases will not, be accurate anymore. We don't know that we have these assumptions. We are unconscious about many things. We are living a myth, just like every other society has its living myths. We have our living myths. And so it's hard for us to understand these things. For example, we, as a culture, I believe we retain an almost childlike belief in technological salvation in the face of decades of evidence to the contrary. And if you harbor an unconscious religious belief in technology as our savior, I probably can't help you. Then the last thing to say here is that we're poor. And if you want to help the Los Alamos Study Group, we always do that. Paul did some of this already, but the energy crisis, it's important not to lump everything together. Now this talk has a problem because it's too abstract and it's really demanding, and I just didn't want to forget anything, and then I ran out of time. So a nuclear power plant in one place is not the same as one in another place. You have to deliver the electricity. There's losses. There's problems with electricity at one time versus electricity at another time. Paul brought up baseload. The sun does not shine at night. Wind does not blow all the time. These are virtues of nuclear power, that it can be constant. Now, the problem with nuclear power is that it tends to be constant. It's hard to throttle nuclear power plants up and down. Fortunately, France is part of a larger European grid system. They have to dump electricity at night at a very low price and then buy it in the afternoon when it's a very expensive price, because they can't just make their nuclear reactors go up and down so easily. We might lump our energy crisis together as if it were one thing, and if we want to think in terms of the first law of thermodynamics, sure, we can exchange energy from one form to another. We need transportation fuel. Nuclear power plants will not supply it. So it's important to distinguish different parts of the problem. Electrical energy remains difficult to store, which is an issue across the board. If you have a lot of big central station production, you may be tempted to dump electricity. So France actually had a advertising campaign to waste electricity. They are through water heating and other wasteful means. Now, let's see here. Now I'm going, this is way too abstract. Some of the advantages that Paul claimed for nuclear power toward the end of his talk about its concentration are, to our eye, disadvantages. It's a matter of looking at the different goals you have for electricity generation. Although I'm skipping ahead in the talk, this point won't make sense if I don't do this. We have to look at our energy generation technology not just as a way to produce kilowatts at a particular time of day. That's important. We also have to think about our industrial policy, about climate, which Paul did, about the skills which we are disseminating and fostering in our communities, the type of institutions we are building and maintaining and encouraging versus other types of institutions, whether the energy technology is compatible with our democratic system or less compatible. Does it have intractable security problems? Does it have, let's see, there's a long list which follows a little bit later. Does it promote rural development? How does it stabilize our economy in the short run as well as the long run? Can we afford investment for how many decades before we really begin to see a net return? All of these questions enter into policy questions about electricity generation. It's not a problem of physics. It's a problem of government. It's a problem of justice. It's a problem of human values. It's a problem of where we want our population to live, what we want to do for a living, who will own the means of production in society, what will matter to us, what kind of people will we become. The general assumption in our discussion so far here has been that we will continue our consumer society, we will have an extremely high standard of living, and we just need a bunch of electricity that will come from somewhere that will enable all of that. We'll go back to the shopping mall, and that'll be that. The premise that I would like to open to you is that that is going to be impossible in any case. That is over. We can't have that anymore. It was only possible because of a unique endowment of fossil fuels and because of a lot of bad activities around the world which funneled a lot of the world's resources to this country. And in any case, for one reason or another, not just the American century, but the consumer way of life is over. We now have to think about a different way of life, a much more sustainable, and we don't like that word, but producing way of life. One that does not, one where the energy crisis that we solve is the crisis which has us sitting on our butts most of the time. And we're not going to get something for nothing. That's a kind of thermodynamics which we haven't yet understand. Okay, I guess I just said this. Decisions about energy are decisions about what kind of society and environment we're going to live in. And I think, as Paul does, the climate crisis is very severe. And it is potentially open-ended in its severity. So you just hope that you understand. Okay, this is why, some more reasons why energy decisions are not just decisions about kilowatts, but because of the scale of the deployment of capital, land, labor, so on, how much time they take, how much, people don't realize that the management attention and political attention is very finite. Obviously, you guys can see it now in Congress. They can't think about anything else but fighting about the budget. They're not having this type of discussion as much as they should be. We have to think about the institutions we build and the characteristics of those institutions. And let's see here. Okay, I think I already said this. I'm sorry to just flip through this. All right, some of the questions we have to ask have to do with safety standards. I dispute some of what Paul said about safety. Somebody was right. Our nuclear power history has been safer than others. The worldwide experience of nuclear power safety is not as attractive. There is a book which either has just come out or is coming out from Benjamin Sovacool, S-O-V-A-C-O-O-L, at the National University of Singapore, looking at nuclear power safety worldwide. It's not so safe at all. There are more deaths from nuclear power plants than there have been aviation deaths in the United States since '82. And it is, I can provide more statistics from an op-ed. I don't have this book. Now that op-ed is published by Al Jazeera. We do not have that kind of dialogue in this country yet. So let's see, we had this morning Congressman Markey. These are very active issues. Congressman Markey his office sent me an email this morning before leaving office. What sort of safety standards do we need to have? The NRC, the National Research Council, or was it the NRC? We were in a terminal rush to get down here. Had a little task force looking at Fukushima and what should be done. And Markey was sending out a press release saying, yes, he agreed with a number of things that this task force had said, which I don't want to read to you. They're there. But some of the issues are, do we really need evacuation plans? Because a lot of the evacuation plans don't work for U.S. nuclear power plants. Populations have grown around power plants. Some of them are intrinsically poorly sited, like Indian Point or San Onofre. I don't think think spent fuel storage is safe, and the National Research Council does not think so either. We have the consequences of a spent fuel accident are horrendous, and they are very vulnerable to both terrorist attack and they're, you know, there's more, maybe Paul knows these numbers off the top of his head, but the amount of number of curies of radiation of cesium-137, for example, in a reactor like Vermont Yankee or Pilgrim in Massachusetts is overwhelming. It's enormous. There's more cesium-137 in the Pilgrim power plant than there was released in all the nuclear tests of all the countries in the world. We have relatively modest loss of grid power requirements in this country. Marking would like to have 72 hours, which seems like not too much to ask for. We have nuclear power plants are stated terrorist targets. Even heavy containment domes are vulnerable to the axles of airliners because they are long and skinny and heavy. And there was the original plan of 9/11 involved an attack on the Indian Point power plant. Most of this is classified and properly so, but if insiders are involved in the plot, then I guess the plot really thickens. It's very hard to protect things if you have insiders who are trying to hurt you. Natural hazard requirements are very important, and we need to, I believe, prepare for multiple hazards. For example, loss of grid power together with a seismic event. You can easily imagine something like that in Southern California. We have some basic design flaws. The Mark I reactors, which we have 23 or so, many people, including the original designers, did not feel they were adequate, and we don't think that the hydrogen provisions are adequate. And the NRC, some of you probably saw a recent expose from the Associated Press, Jeff Don, D-O-O-N. It's in the bibliography in the back. The NRC has been increasingly weakening its safety standards and the performance of the regulated parties. So promises are being substituted for actual performance. I used to be an environmental regulator and sort of warmed to the idea of financial penalties for non-compliance. And that's just a pitch to be active. Okay, now I want to spend 5 minutes talking about why the assumptions of normality and the assumptions of reliability and the assumptions of low risk in the management sense in the future are troubled ones. There's a talk, we didn't make more than 12 copies of it, part of the talk at least, back there with slides, about this. We have an oil problem, which is connected to an economic problem and a financial problem. And it is imminent, it is understood by the Pentagon, it is understood by the National Security Council, understood by Secretary Chu, by the Wehrmacht, it is understood by the Petrobras, Brazilian state oil company, it is understood by the executives of Total in France, it is understood by many senior oil specialists around the world. And it's not talked about too much because it is politically incendiary. We at the study group are looking, we think that there's, along with Goldman Sachs, also think that commodity prices will rise for oil very soon. It's not clear that the United States economy can survive another oil shock without recession. Recessions decrease demand for electricity. Last one. This is a lot of macroeconomic stuff, which only thing I wanted, this is also a characteristic of nuclear power in general. There is a wonderful book by Charles Perrow, P-E-R-R-O-W, called Normal Accidents, where he talks about high-risk technologies, which are characterized by their total hazard, by their tight coupling of subsystems, by their opacity to the operators. He has a discussion of the TMI accident there. Nuclear power is a high-risk technology par excellence and is susceptible to what are called normal accidents. Institutions that manage high-risk technologies may or may not become high-reliability organizations. They may be like most civilian organizations and have a little strain of what we see in the Dilbert cartoon series, where they're not perfect. Organizations are not run by saints, and there are problems. We do not see our society, we're sort of catastrophists, if you want to put a single word on it. We see our society having trouble managing very large, complex technological enterprises that are extremely expensive, have long lead times, use specialized materials, and require specialized skills far into the future. We see a lot of things as on the table, and this affects the management risk and the financial risk of the nuclear power business, as it would for anything else of comparable. It isn't because it's nuclear, it's because it's complicated, because the hazards are very great, because the costs are great, and the lead time is great. I'm very angry about what we're doing to our young people. That's got in there, a little bit of anger. 10 minutes, right? Okay. All right, this we talked about. So nuclear power has some problems. Robustness and stability, cost. We think that the capital cost of nuclear power plants, we think the actual capital cost is on the order of 17 to 20 cents kilowatt hour installed. We think that the full life cycle cost is even more, and that the nuclear power is promoted because these costs are hidden like the pea end of the walnut shell. Some go out here. There's a discount offered capital. There's property tax discounts. There's credit for producing nuclear electricity for the first people who sign up. There's a credit here and a credit there. But as an older generation accountant in Grand Junction, Colorado, Craig Severance, who is a fantastic writer on these topics, these costs do appear somewhere, elsewhere in society. And they don't go away just because they don't appear on the firm's balance sheet. Let's see, nuclear power has a high entry cost. We've just seen the cost and the scalability problem knock nuclear power out of consideration for the very pro-nuclear province of Ontario, Canada. And Austin, the city of Austin, dropped its interest in an AREVA. Was it 2 plants or something like that? 2 plants, AREVA. It's going to build it. The problem is that if the deal goes south, it's the end. It's too big for a city like Austin. And maybe it's too big for a province like Ontario to do a cluster of nuclear power plants. The downside risks are very great. You can bankrupt a country, a small country. Let's see, lead time. Yep. Security. We're not sure about security. Protection of climate. All right. We think that nuclear power, primarily through its opportunity costs, has a negative effect on protecting the climate. Now, non-existing nuclear power plants, new nuclear power plants. So this is strongly discriminates between new and old nuclear power plants. So if something is very expensive, then you'd be better off building something very cheap. And if it takes a long time, you'd be much better off doing something that takes a short amount of time, that builds those institutions, builds those factories, builds those careers, and builds the political momentum to take care of a problem quickly if it's a serious enough problem, which we think it is. Nuclear power dollars compete directly for renewable energy, and the institutions are hostile to renewable energy. And the reason is because you can't make as much money. If you're Bechtel or if you're Areva or any company of that scale, nuclear power can offers you monopolistic benefits. It offers you access to privileged markets. If you have access to the State Department, as Westinghouse did when it was marketing nuclear power plants to Egypt, as WikiLeaks tells us, if you have that kind of access, you get into a market no one else can get into. But if you're building solar panels or wind turbines, you're competing against the Danes, the Chinese, goodness knows who. So you know that there was a conversation between Thomas Edison and J.P. Morgan. Thomas Edison said, well, we're just getting started with electricity. When we can get something, we get the solar energy, then we'll really be cooking. And J.P. Morgan said, but where will we put the meter? And that's the problem for these very large corporations. There isn't a privileged wealth stream. Let's see here. The long lead times and the capital and resource intensivity translate to high carbon emissions over the crucial decade or two. Now, nuclear power is declining worldwide. I have to tell you, because power plants are aging. So we've just lost a couple of net power plants. It will be almost impossible to keep the same number of nuclear power plants operating in 10 years as we have today, because they are getting older and they have to be retired. If we do try to keep them too long, we will have serious problems. One serious problem can knock out a country. A small country is not very far downwind from a nuclear power plant. The Germans have found that they're not so compatible with renewable energy generation from wind and sun. Paul made a good point when he said they could buy that baseline from France, because I think that's true. That's a good point. Let's see, they're lumpy. That's a problem because when you don't know the future demand, you don't know how much to invest. So, it would be, for PNM, it would be much cheaper for them to replace these light bulbs than to build more capacity. Nuclear power plants are vulnerable to climate change because water fluctuates. They need water. They need a lot of water. Water fluctuates up and down. If there's too little water, that's not good. If there's too much water, that's not good. Typo. There's equity issues which are true because of the hazard and because of the long lead time and great cost. So you can see that. The kids have to take care of the nuclear waste. The kids have to take care of the decommissioning. The people, 100 miles downwind are exposed to a potential safety problem, but they're not getting the electricity necessarily. But in any case, perhaps those things could be addressed, but they are there. You can see this outline's not very well filled in. The total hazard is great. And part of the cost question with nuclear power is how do you internalize the risk? What kind of actuarial number do you put in there? We have to look at employment, how many jobs are created, where. Do we want to, in New Mexico, for example, do we want to build a modular nuclear reactor in Carlsbad or some nuclear reactor in Carlsbad, or do we want to use up all that land so to speak, and put economic development in our rural communities up and down the eastern part of the state with wind turbines, and have a whole bunch of people working productively or not? What kind of industry do we want to develop? Do we want to be buying all of our renewable energy parts from other countries while we invest in what is basically, we think, almost a sunset technology, nuclear power? I'm very concerned about the dissemination of skills in our society. We work with people and we don't see knowledge. Are we out or we have 5 minutes? Okay. Proliferation. Everybody who gets nuclear weapons gets them because they think because nuclear power is great. So we think new nuclear power stations almost never make sense from economic, climate protection, or security perspectives, or from the perspective of maintaining and enhancing the institutions of democracy. And so we think that there's national security issues about this choice. I'm sure Paul agrees. We make the wrong choices, we're going to be in deeper doo-doo. We don't want to waste resources of any kind. We don't want boondoggles. And this is the hardcore. If it is true that, as Craig Severance says, nuclear power costs in the upper 20s cents per kilowatt hour. If it's not economic, if it doesn't help the climate, if it's not a security benefit, then what is it? It is a means by which some institutions maintain their gross income while enlisting the sincere and devoted, intelligent help of many smart people to do so. There is an excellent report by Michael Snyder and 2 other authors, Nuclear Power in a Post-Fukushima World, which reviews the status of nuclear power worldwide. There are a few copies back there. It is available from the World Watch Institute. We think that nuclear power will be increasingly uneconomic in the future because of some of these factors we talked about. And I'm not imputing, I'm not saying that everyone is insincere. I'm saying that we have developed institutions that have their own internal belief systems. So as soon, for example, at UNM, which is a few blocks from our house, as soon as Fukushima happened, UNM nuclear engineering students started pamphleting the UNM with the virtues of nuclear power. Well, what the hell is that? They are learning to be baby propagandists. That's it. I think I better, there's a few more things, but I think waste problem. I better say something about waste. Waste is a technical problem and it's a political problem. There are a lot of geologic formations that are appropriate for storing nuclear waste. One of my friends who knows much more about this says that there are many geologic formations that can store nuclear waste, provided they have the right hydrologic properties, namely no water, internal closed basin, that sort of thing. But if people don't want it, then it's a serious problem, and we have to pay attention to how badly they don't want it, because that can delegitimize a government. It can. We can't just roll over people, even though we sometimes may want to. But it becomes comes when you need to use the violence that states can deploy to take care of a problem like nuclear waste, then you realize that you're pushing the limits of a democratic legitimate state.